Hello and welcome to this first tutorial for this course. We are going to be looking at the sociological imagination and the spatial imagination from a personal perspective, and I will first briefly introduce the assignment to you, and then we have the 3 TAs for this course whom I will briefly introduce before they begin. Try their hand at presenting their version of this assignment, and I'm very thankful to them for generously agreeing to present their own personal biographies in the context of a historical and a geographical perspective. This, I think, has several advantages, in the sense that through this assignment we get to know you as students and you get to know us as those who are on the other side of the video. So I will also, towards the end of this lecture, present my personal biography in the context of world history and geographical sites that I have inhabited. So let's begin with an introduction to the assignment. In this assignment, I would like you to write down and present to us a personal biography, but from the perspective of what C. Wright Mills has called the sociological imagination. In addition, I would like you to use a spatial imagination, like we spoke about in our previous classes, of looking at what kind of spaces have you inhabited, how have those spaces impacted your life's journey, what possibilities became available to you and what was not available to you based on where you lived, what social structure did you inhabit, what kind of housing, infrastructures, what did you have access to, where did your gender, caste, class or other forms of identity inhibit access and where it enabled it. How did it shape your personal beliefs? How did it shape the kinds of decisions you made in your own life? And how did it give certain meanings to particular social relations that you have been that are part of your life. So that's the kind of work that I want you to do. It's a personal but very deeply sociological essay, a reflexive essay that I'm wanting you to write. You can make it like a photo essay. It can have maps, it can have hand-drawn sketches, other visuals, it can have photographs. So I would say put your heart and mind into it and try to reflect on your own life's journey using the various ways of thinking sociologically, and spatially that we have discussed in the lectures so far. I would like you to, so this is the first part that we are going to do as part of this week. But eventually I would also want you to continue to have this reflection through the other theories and ways of thinking and analytically understanding the world that we pursue in the lectures ahead. But for now, looking forward to reading and looking at your personal biographies from the perspective of a socio-spatial imagination. So let's move forward. We have with us 3 TAs for this course, and I will begin by introducing Sikandar Ali. Sikandar Ali is a doctoral student in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IISER Mohali. He is also TAing for this course. I will not speak too much in terms of where he is from, what he is doing, because that is what his essay is going to be about. Srijay Sutar is also a doctoral scholar in IISER Mohali and is also a TA for this course. And Sneha Saha graduated with a BS/MS degree from IISER Mohali and is TAing for this course. So the 3 of them, like I said, have very generously agreed to help us out with their version of this assignment, which I think will be an excellent example for you to pursue, which should not though restrict you. I mean, you shouldn't think of it as they've done it this way, so I also have to do it this way. Please feel free and creative to do it in the way you want to do it, but just so that you don't feel overwhelmed, we are putting forth some examples. So let's begin.
Hi, my name is Sikandar Ali. I'm one of the TAs for this course. In this tutorial, I'm talking about how personal journeys are shaped by larger socio-spatial forces. So I was born and raised in a small village in Kargil, Ladakh, a place where border geopolitics, difficult terrain, and infrastructural neglect are not rare, but everyday conditions. C. Wright Mills writes that neither biography nor history can be understood without understanding both of them together. My own childhood exemplifies this intersection. What felt like personal challenges such as limited schooling, seasonal isolation, militarized surroundings, and a lack of basic development were in fact part of larger public issues, such as state neglect of borderland communities, uneven development, and the geopolitical anxieties between India, Pakistan, and China. My early life was not just a personal story, it was shaped by the structural realities of living in a remote and strategic space where national priorities affect or often overshadowed local needs. Using a sociological imagination, I now see how many of the questions that I was curious about, such as why is my region underdeveloped, why are opportunities so unevenly distributed, who decides what development is or what development looks like, were not merely personal curiosities. They've emerged from structural contradictions that Mills describes as the tension between individual troubles and public issues. What seemed like my personal struggle for education was part of a larger historical pattern in which borderland tribal communities like mine faced systematic marginalization. A spatial imagination further illuminates how place itself shaped my identity and worldview. Ladakh is a high altitude, fragile ecologies and militarized landscapes form more than a backdrop picture. They actively structure social life. Growing up amid mountains that both protected and isolated us taught me resilience, but also exposed me to the unequal geographies of citizenship. Development arrived slowly, often through top-down projects such as road expansions, tunnels, and military expansions, which transformed our environmental and social relations. The 6-month isolation of the region due to snowfall and the cutoff of the road connectivities shaped my educational and personal growth. These are larger spatial inequalities that shape personal stories, and they don't just sit in the background as a background picture. This is the power of spatial imagination to capture a larger picture and link that with personal journeys. As I moved from a village to cities like Jammu, Delhi, eventually here to Mohali for my doctoral work, each spatial tensions expanded my vision. Urban cities and universities here showed new forms of inequalities, but also new possibilities for me. My studies in political science, then anthropology and human geography helped me recognize that my life story was part of larger historical processes, such as post-colonial nation building, ecological change in the Himalayas, and the global push for infrastructure development. What was once felt like a private sense of displacement became, through sociological imagination and awareness of how mobility, opportunity, and marginality are spatially produced. Today, my PhD research on roads, tunnels, and environmental transformation in the Western Himalayas is deeply autobiographical. By studying how infrastructure reshapes mobility, livelihoods, and ecosystems, I am also examining the very forces that shape my own life. In this sense, my biography is inseparably linked to the broader broader social history that shaped it. Mills reminds us that understanding this intersection is both a personal awakening and an intellectual responsibility. My work attempts to honor that responsibility by raising voices from the margins and revealing how place, power, and history intertwine in lived experiences. Thank you.
Hi, I am Sneha and I will briefly run through my personal biography and how it is connected to the social. So my family history, particularly from my mother's paternal side, offers a vibrant example of how personal experiences are inseparable from larger social structures and historical transformations. For nearly 4 centuries, my ancestors lived in what is now Bangladesh, serving as zamindars in Faridpur. The Shikdar Bali in Kanaipur village, built by Rani Bhavotarini Shikdar and administered with the help of her only son Satish Chandra Shikdar, stood not only as a palatial residence but also as a spatial symbol of authority, culture, life, and religion influence. The rise and decline of this estate mirror major political, economical, and spatial shifts from South Asia, illustrating what C. Wright Mills calls the sociological imagination, the intersection of personal biography and historical change. The Shikdar family's transition from local rulers to displaced migrants is inseparable from the broader transformation of Bengal's political economy. During the colonial and early post colonial periods, zamindari power was rooted in land and revenue systems, agrarian hierarchies, and rural patronage networks. The Shikdar family's transition from the local rulers to displaced migrants is inseparable from the broader transformation of Bengal's political economy. During the colonial and early post colonial periods, zamindari power was rooted in land revenue systems, agrarian hierarchies, and rural patronage networks. As long as the land system remained intact, the estate played a central role in shaping the social world of Faridpur, its livelihood, relationships, and authority structures. After Satish Chandra, his eldest son, Surendranath inherited most of the property, but his untimely death shifted responsibility to his wife Radha Rani Shikdar, my paternal grandfather's grandmother. Her leadership during a period of social transition reflects how gender roles and family authority were also shaped by changing structures of governance and opportunity. However, these personal transitions were overshadowed by the dramatic political events of the mid 20th century, the decline of the zamindar system, the rise of the Calcutta as a regional economic hub, and the later Bangladesh Liberation War reshaped the very geography that sustained the Shikdar estate. As family members moved to Calcutta seeking education, work, and urban opportunities, the estate gradually lost its centrality. The upheaval of 1971 forced remaining relatives to leave Faridpur entirely, ending the era of the family's influence and marking the beginning of new struggles, that is identity crisis, economic readjustments, and the emotional loss of homeland. From a spatial imagination perspective, the places my family inhabited shaped who they became and how they navigated the world. The grand architecture of Shikdar Bari represented stability, lineage, and authority. Its courtyards and open land embodied a worldview tied to community leadership and agrarian rhythms. In contrast, Calcutta's urban spaces, with their dense neighborhoods, economic pressures, and multicultural interaction, produced new aspirations but also new insecurities. Displacement from Faridpur to Calcutta was not simply a physical move, it transformed identity, social networks, and future possibilities. A life once defined by inherited land and rural prestige became one shaped by migration, competition, and adaptation in a modern city. Reflecting on this history through Mill's lens reveals that what appears as a personal family story is actually a chapter in the larger narrative of colonial legacies. The restructuring of land ownership, migration, and nation building, my family's journey illustrates how biography and history meet and how geography itself becomes a force shaping identity, opportunity, and belonging. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Srijay and I will briefly run through my personal biography for this assignment and I will explore how this connects to the social. So my life so far has been shaped by a continuous movement across cities, starting with Kolkata where I was born, followed by Mumbai where I did my school and high school, and then Pune where I did my undergrad and masters, followed by Mohali where I'm currently doing my doctoral research, and finally Delhi where I'm doing the fieldwork for my doctoral research. So each shift from one city to another has been more than a mere change of address. It has been a lesson in knowing how space, how culture, and social structures intertwine in the urban setting. So this journey was partly shaped due to my father's positioning in a government service in a transferable job. And by extension, therefore, the opportunities made available to me in these cities, especially in planning my way forward through higher education. So even though I was always deeply connected to the city center in terms of schooling and education, I was always housed in the suburbs in every city that I lived in. This is a very common phenomenon in India, especially in working class, middle class families. This meant longer commutes to schools, to colleges, to hospitals, to markets, and to urban and to access to urban infrastructure in general, which has a more prominent, a more thick presence in the urban core, in the urban center. So this is definitely not a unique experience, but it goes on to show how personal experiences can be deeply social. For instance, moving from a large neighborhood suburban context of living in Kolkata to a more apartment style, crammed up, dense condition of living in Mumbai taught me how cities can shape and change aspirations and opportunities. For instance, why is the local train in Mumbai much more crowded than the local train in Kolkata? What attracts people to one urban space more than another? This can be a research question drawn from personal experience. So urban cities in India have a lot in common with each other. The crowded streets, the sharp contrasts between different styles of living, between gated societies, between non-gated societies, between informal settlements, and there is also always a constant negotiation for space, for room in buses, in trains, on the road, during traffic, in long waiting zones, or queues, pretty much everywhere. The city teaches us that the space is never neutral. It is a reflection of power, of crisis, of infrastructure, of the social, of class, of aspiration, and deep social contradictions. For instance, I always remember my parents advising and warning me to always take the safest possible road back home or back to the hostel. And this concern is more when I'm in a particular city. So what makes me feel safe more in one city than another also becomes a social theory question. What dictates safety? Why is it that something which is safe for me may be unsafe for another? How does gender, how does caste, class, sexuality, all of these factors come into play? So living close to urban centers also meant immense aspirational possibilities for the working class. Cities in India function as concentrated spaces of visibility and invisibility in terms of wealth, lifestyle, and mobility. For working class families living in and around these urban cores, everyday exposure to a new form of living, a so-called higher form of living, makes a sense of what can be possible as aspiration. This is not just economic aspiration, but also a cultural reimagination of how one can live. This is shaped by proximity, by so many social factors. Both my parents came from extremely rural and though educated backgrounds, and this shaped the way urban aspiration entered my family. Their education gave them certain sense and access to certain forms of mobility, but their rural upbringing meant that urban life was still a world they were trying to read and navigate. But living close to these urban centers exposed them, and by extension exposed me to the urban way of living. But for the difference was that for me it was more immediate. So my parents have also always romanticized their rural origins, their rural upbringings, the slow rhythms, the slow pace, stronger social bonds, close-knit communities that the urban life for them can rarely offer. They often speak with nostalgia about landscapes, about environment, things like clean air or pollution, things like festivals, social bonds that characterize their villages. Yet, despite this longing, they always return back to the urban. The rural just becomes a site of yearly vacation. This repeated return reflects a deep socio-spatial tension that characterizes many such families and many such rural to urban migrants in India. I see it as how the urban promises mobility. At the same time, it puts the individual or the family into a precarious condition, into a precarious labor market with precarious costs of living and endless competition. But at the same time, it also offers endless possibilities. It offers luxury and aspiration and opportunity. So the city is fundamentally a dialectic of contradictions, a space where these forces of contradiction coexist and continuously make, unmake, and remake each other. It is a site of immense possibility and deep, very deep inequality, a landscape where freedoms are negotiated, they're expanded for some and constrained for others. On one side, the city represents opportunity, mobility, and aspiration, innovation, and a certain sense of promise of making yourself. But on the other hand, it also manifests exclusion, it manifests impoverishment and precarity. I would like to end by talking about one aspect of the city that stands out to me the most, which is anonymity. Anonymity is a very essential and distinctive feature of a city, and it plays a crucial role in shaping your identity in the city. In the city, unlike in rural settings or suburban settings, anonymity plays a very crucial role, because in rural or suburban settings, to some extent, individuals are more or less known or more or less socially legible. People generally know each other. So, but in cities, individuals can move across space, they are more fluid, and there is a lack of this visible scrutiny or judgment around yourself. This anonymity therefore creates a paradoxical freedom. It allows people to experiment with who they are, it allows them to reimagine themselves, and also allows them to adopt a certain identity that could have been that most likely would be suppressed or constrained in a non-urban setting. This constraint can arise from kinship networks, from family pressure, community pressure, from gender roles, from caste roles, and so on. Urbanism thus becomes a social environment where the self can be fluid, it can be negotiated, it is actively constructed rather than inherited. At the same time, anonymity also means that identity has agency, it has choice, and it is actively regulated through performance, through presentation. So one's clothing, one's language, one's neighborhood, one's profession, their consumption habits, their friend circles, all of these things become markers and signals of the way people position themselves in a certain social hierarchy in the urban. In this sense, anonymity encourages individuals to craft themselves, to craft themselves in a way they want to be known. The city for me, therefore, becomes a stage where one identifies both freedom from tradition, and they are also shaped by new forms of consumption, of competition, aspiration, and display. So I will end here, and I am really looking forward to reading your essays about your personal biographies, and I'm really excited to read how you connected to the social.
So now it's my turn. It's always a pleasure to see your students surpassing you. And it's been a joy to hear their sociological and spatial imaginations. And I must say, I'm perhaps not as prepared, but I do have some visuals for you. It's not a written out essay, but let me try and walk you through my socio-spatial imagination. So I put up a map here of India before 1947 to show where my family comes from. Even though we belong to northern India, what is now called Punjab, my father's family migrated to West Punjab after or during India's partition, so the partition of Punjab. They were resident in Lahore, right here, and my mother's family, my maternal grandparents, moved from Burma at the time of the Second World War, when the Japanese invaded Burma, and therefore they were forced to move back into mainland India. So I see myself as belonging to a family of migrants, of people who have moved a lot. And how I see that shaping my personal biography is the fact that I don't quite feel attachment to place in the way that somebody who might have grown up and have very extended social networks in one place might feel. I've also put up here a map of India just before the partition happened, and discussions and debates on which parts would go to India and which parts would go to Pakistan, just to show you how much of a stroke of fate it is. Between Lahore and Amritsar there is one line, and those two cities, beautiful cities, are barely a few miles apart. And yet, if you were on this side of the border, you belonged to one country, and if you were on the other side of the border, then you belonged to a different country. And if you didn't fit in there in terms of your religion, then you had to move across borders, like most people did. So that's kind of how a major historical event shapes a family's biography. Again, in this map, I've shown the various migrations, both in my broader family, so my parents and grandparents' generation, but also I belong to, my father was in the Indian military, and so we traveled a lot, we moved a lot, and I inhabited many different places across the country. I have them marked in blue here. So from Ladakh, right here, I don't know, okay, sorry, I don't know how to work this, but I'm trying. Ladakh right here to Ahmedabad, Indore, Mao. We were in Delhi for some time, and then eventually I've also spent quite some time in Auroville in South India. So what I'm trying to say is that having lived in all these different places, especially as a child growing up, I should have maybe learnt several different languages, imbibed cultural traits from many different places, but that didn't quite happen. And now I question why that didn't happen, and I see that wherever we lived inside military cantonments, which are for the most part very homogeneous, protected and isolated spaces. And while you do mix with several people coming from all over the country, the culture inside a cantonment is very, very similar whether you are living in Mao, in Indore, or whether you are in Ladakh, in Leh. For the most part, not always. The houses look very similar, the rituals are very similar, the way people relate to each other and engage with each other is very similar. So that is what I grew up with. Well, it was also a very privileged childhood in the sense that I grew up with a sense of safety and security around me. Cantonments were vast gated communities where as children we could roam around freely, play around without the dangers of, let's say, growing up in urban India now, which some people or many people actually feel the fear of traffic, the fear of, intruders or gendered safety and so on. I want to now also speak briefly about, so as I felt secure and safe, belonging also in terms of class and caste structures that I inhabit, but when it was, and so within India I felt that there was a lot of equality, and maybe there is I wouldn't say, well, this part I have to cut out actually. So it was only when I moved to the United States did I realize what it means to be a minority. What does it mean to not fit in? What does it mean to be looked at as a brown person amongst a broadly, largely white community where, especially inside the university systems and also outside, and also to not quite, fit in. Although I must say there were many encouraging experiences and people and friends you find everywhere, but for the first time I got a sense of being kind of not the norm, and that really was, I think, a significant defining moment in terms of how I understood the other and how the other might feel when they were not the norm. So now I want to go over a few very broad, very major history events which I remember quite strongly during my growing up. I'll focus on some and maybe others have them just up here on the slide. And while I was born in the 1970s, I've also put up 1960s in this timeline, primarily because the city where I'm in now, Chandigarh, was as the independent India's first planned city designed by modernist architect, French architect Le Corbusier, and this was initiated in 1960s as a city that was supposed to be a matter of pride for Punjab. It was also to resettle the refugees that came from Lahore, because Lahore, being the earlier capital for undivided Punjab, was going to be in Pakistan. So Chandigarh's planning and development starts in the 1960s. 1960s is a very important era for post-colonial India. This is where India explicitly decides to be non-aligned, so it's the non-alignment era. It's also the time in Punjab for Green Revolution, where lot of technical and scientific involvement with agriculture in a state that was primarily agriculturally oriented happens. 1970s, in the decade that I was born, the two major events were the Indo-Pak War, this being significant considering my father was a young military officer at the time, and the emergency, which also is that one brief moment where India was explicitly undemocratic. In the 1980s, all very central to Punjab, Operation Blue Star, resulting in the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and we were school children, and the way we witnessed all of this was more like something big has happened and it's a school holiday. But only later does one realize the impact and the significance on the psyche and social relations that surround you of these events in Punjab. I very clearly remember the Bhopal gas tragedy. I was 12 years old, and I came upon the India Today cover with the photograph of a half buried child, like a baby, and that really I think a lot of my environmental, ecological, and social consciousness comes from the what I felt even at that time as the unjust and environmentally disastrous situation owing to what we can call as unregulated capitalist greed. So these kind of things shaped my sensibilities. When I entered college, there was the Mandal Commission, a major movement in my first year, the protests against the Mandal Commission. This was something I witnessed, the Babri Masjid, and the neoliberal reforms in India, alongside the WTO protests against globalization and rapid capitalist development in Seattle. Why I say this is because we as college students also noticed a very clear shift between students who let's say entered prior to liberalization and those that entered after. I mean, we did not have access to, let's say, Coca-Cola or all the television channels. We grew up in an India of Doordarshan, of one channel that came only in the evening. So the media exposure, the kinds of things you saw, all of that shape who you become as a person, and that I see for myself. 2000s have seen the emergence of IT outsourcing hubs in India. That's also the time that I spent in the United States from 1999 to 2010. And so that decade saw the rise of global terror. September 11 attacks happened right in the middle of it. And I remember really feeling very worried and very shaken, and being looked at as as somebody who is the other, as somebody who can't quite understand the angst, even though it was as disturbing for all of us also. And then I moved back in the 2010s, and the starting of ISIS, where I work, by the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, which, because these institutions of which really wanted to focus on science began, this is where I came and have found my vocation. 2010s and 20s have seen increased polarization alongside increased digitalization. We know our lives have changed because of Aadhaar, UPI payments, GST, all of that. And more recently, we are seeing a growing intolerance in the world in terms of any difference, especially in relation to immigrants or anybody perceived as not, again, from the norm. There is also global financial instability, and the risks of climate change are becoming very clear. So these aspects are shaping my sensibilities and the kind of questions that I ask in my research and in my life. I will end here and